The coffee trembled in the tin cup. Not from the calm, though the September morning carried the first bite of winter yet to come.
Hold on tight, we're
Not from
almost
the
through this.
campfire's heat,
So
though the
cold, are we
flames
safe?
danced close
Yes,
enough to
stay
warm
close.
weathered hands. The tremor came from somewhere deeper, from a place 3 years of drifting hadn't managed to quiet. Caleb Reed stared into the dark liquid like it held answers he'd stopped asking for. 34 years old, but his hands told a different story. Calluses layered upon calluses, scars crossing scars, the map of a man who'd chosen physical labor over thought movement, over stillness, anything to keep the ghosts at bay. People say time heals all wounds. They're lying. The thought came unbidden, the way they always did in these quiet hours before dawn. Before the sun forced him to move, to pack his bedroll, to mount Ranger, and put more miles between himself and yesterday. Before he had to pretend that drifting meant something, that this endless horizon promised freedom instead of just more emptiness. The memory surfaced like it always did, sharp and merciless, despite 3 years of trying to dull its edges. Sarah's voice hoarse from hours of labor begging him not to go. The farm needed money, the baby needed a doctor. He needed to be 10 miles away, proving he could provide, proving he was man enough to carry the weight alone. By the time he'd ridden back with the money and the doctor, there were 2 bodies cooling in the bed instead of the family he'd promised to protect. His wife, the daughter he never got to meet, both gone because he'd believed strength meant shouldering everything himself, because he'd thought asking for help made you weak, because pride killed more surely than any bullet. Rain had been falling that day in Missouri. It fell on the fresh-turned earth of 2 graves too small to contain the enormity of what he'd lost. It fell on a man who'd learned too late that the cost of independence could be everything that made life worth living. He'd stood there, water streaming down his face, mixing with tears he hadn't known he was crying. "Sarah, I should have listened. I should have stayed. Now I hear your voice every night telling me what I already know. I failed you both." The admission hadn't brought peace. Nothing had. Not the whiskey he'd drowned himself in for the first 6 months. Not the 1,000 miles he'd ridden trying to outrun memory. Not the deliberate isolation, the refusal to let anyone close enough to matter. He wasn't running from the pain. He was running toward punishment, using loneliness like a knife he could turn on himself again and again, a penance that never quite balanced the scales. Caleb poured the coffee onto the fire, watched it hiss and die. Mounted Ranger with the mechanical efficiency of ritual repeated too many times to count. The buck's skin gelding shifted beneath him, patient as always, accepting this rootless existence, because horses didn't question the choices of broken men. The Montana plains stretched endlessly in every direction, grass silvered with morning dew, the sun just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of copper and gold. Beautiful in a way that hurt to notice. Beautiful in a way he'd trained himself not to see. The trail wound through country that had probably looked exactly the same 100 years ago and would look the same 100 years hence. Eternal, indifferent. A landscape that didn't care about the small tragedies of small men, that would absorb his passage and forget he'd ever existed. That suited him fine. Ranger's hooves found their rhythm, that steady 4-beat gait that could eat miles without complaint. Caleb let his mind drift into the empty space the road provided, thinking about nothing, heading nowhere, existing in the comfortable numbness that came from having no destination and no one waiting. Then he heard it. Faint at first, barely audible over the wind moving through the grass and the creak of leather and the jingle of Ranger's bit. A sound that made something cold slide down his spine, because he'd heard it before and knew what it meant. A child crying. His hands tightened on the reins without conscious thought. Ranger's ears flicked back, questioning. Caleb's jaw clenched hard enough to make his teeth ache. This had happened twice before in 3 years of wandering. Once in Wyoming, once in Colorado. Both times he'd heard a child in distress somewhere off the trail. Both times he'd touched his heels to Ranger's flanks and kept riding, telling himself it wasn't his business, that involvement led to complications, that he'd already proven he couldn't protect the people who depended on him. Both times he'd spent the next week wondering if that child had died, because he'd been too much of a coward to stop. The crying grew louder as Ranger continued forward. Not the simple tears of a scraped knee or lost toy. This was the sound of desperation, of terror, of someone who'd been screaming for help until their voice gave out and still no help came. The sound was coming from beyond a cluster of weathered rocks and scrub brush about 30 yards off the trail. Caleb could see them clearly now in the strengthening light, could calculate exactly how long it would take to ride past to let the crying fade behind him, to add this to the list of small failures he carried like stones in his pockets. His hands wouldn't cooperate. Instead of urging Ranger forward, he found himself pulling back on the reins, bringing the horse to a halt. Man and animal stood motionless on the empty trail while the crying continued ragged and broken and utterly alone. Something about the voice stopped him. The pitch of it, the particular quality of desperation. It sounded exactly like the daughter he'd imagined during Sarah's pregnancy, the child who'd existed only in his dreams and hopes before she died without drawing breath. He'd spent 9 months picturing her voice, wondering what her first words would be, imagining teaching her to ride and read and see beauty in the world. This crying child sounded like every hope he'd buried in Missouri dirt. If I ride past this one, Sarah's ghost will never forgive me. The thought came clear and certain. He'd spent 3 years running from her memory, but he couldn't outrun the simple truth that Sarah would have stopped. Would have helped without hesitation, without calculation, without the selfishness that had defined too many of his choices. Maybe he couldn't undo the past, but he could stop adding to the weight of regret. Caleb swung down from the saddle with movements that felt like surrender, looped Ranger's reins over a low branch and walked toward the sound, his boots loud on the hard-packed earth, his heart beating too fast for a man just checking on a crying child. She was crouched beside a flat rock, thin shoulders shaking with sobs that had long since passed the point of control. 7 or 8 years old at most, dark hair tangled around a face streaked with tears and dirt, and 3 days' worth of fear. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hands scraped raw, her eyes when they met his carrying the kind of knowledge no child should possess. The crying stopped abruptly when she saw him. For a moment, they just stared at each other, stranger and desperate child, while the Montana wind moved through the grass and the sun climbed higher, and the moment balanced on a knife edge between walking away and stepping into something that would change everything. Then she spoke, her voice rough from crying, but carrying an edge that surprised him. 13 people. I asked 13 people. Every one of them said, not my problem. You're number 14. The words hit harder than any accusation. This wasn't just a lost child. This was someone who'd learned the bitter lesson that most people choose convenience over compassion, that neighbors could watch suffering and justify looking away, that being in need made you invisible to those who had enough. Caleb's throat felt tight. Help with what? Where's your family? She scrambled to her feet with an urgency that made him step back instinctively. Small hands grabbed at his vest, his sleeve clinging with surprising strength for someone so young. My mama. She's real sick, burning up with fever and not making sense when she talks. Been 3 days now, and she just keeps getting worse, and I don't know what to do, and nobody will help, and please, Mr. Please. The words tumbled over each other, dissolving into fresh tears. Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. A sick woman, a child alone, no sign of anyone else. The mathematics of frontier survival were brutally simple. Without help, they were both likely already dead. The child just didn't know it yet. How far is your mama? 2 miles, maybe. That direction, she pointed west toward the low hills. Our cabin's in the hollow past that ridge. Does she have fever? Real bad. I tried to cool her down like she taught me when I had fever last winter, but nothing works. She keeps calling for Papa, but Papa's dead since last winter, and I'm scared she's dying too, and I'll be all alone. The fear in those last words was bottomless. Caleb knew that fear intimately, had felt it standing by 2 graves in the rain. The fear that everyone you love can disappear, that you can wake up one morning and find yourself utterly alone in a world that doesn't care. He made his decision without fully understanding why. Maybe guilt, maybe the ghost of a daughter he'd never met, maybe just the fact that this child had asked 13 people and refused to give up, and that kind of stubborn courage deserved better than being turned away by number 14. Show me. Her face transformed. Relief so profound it was painful to witness flooded through her expression. She grabbed his hand with both of hers and pulled him toward where Ranger waited. I'm Lily. Lily Hale. My mama's Martha, and she's the bravest person I know, and she can't die because I need her. I'm Caleb Reed, and we're going to do everything we can to help your mama. That's a promise. He lifted her into the saddle and swung up behind her, touched his heels to Ranger's flanks, and let the child point the way. The buckskin moved into an easy lope, carrying them toward the hollow and whatever waited there. The sun continued climbing. The grassland gave way to rockier ground, and Caleb felt the familiar pull of the open trail behind him, the temptation to turn back before it was too late to preserve the careful distance he'd maintained between himself and anyone who might need him. But he'd given his word to a 7-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to keep asking for help when every adult had failed her. That meant something, or it meant nothing at all. And if it meant nothing, then 3 years of running had taught him exactly nothing about who he wanted to be. The cabin appeared as they crested the ridge, and Caleb's heart sank at what he saw below. It huddled in the shallow valley like something trying to disappear into the earth itself. Weathered logs gaps visible between them even from this distance. Roof sagging on one side patched with what looked like canvas or hide. A lean-to that might have once housed livestock stood empty, its door hanging crooked. No smoke rose from the chimney, despite the morning chill. No sign of life. No movement. Nothing to suggest anyone lived there at all except for a small garden plot, mostly withered now, and a rain barrel by the door. This wasn't just isolation. This was abandonment. A family forgotten by their community, left to survive or fail on their own. "That's home," Lily said quietly, and something in her voice suggested she knew exactly how it looked. Caleb guided Ranger down the slope without comment. As they drew closer, more details emerged. Clothes hanging stiff on a line never brought in. A bucket overturned by the door. Garden tools scattered as if dropped mid-task. These were the signs of crisis of a household where normal rhythms had shattered. He pulled Ranger to a stop and lifted Lily down. She immediately ran to the door, pushing it open. "Mama. Mama, I brought help." The smell hit him first when he followed her inside. Sickness, sweat, the close air of a room sealed tight for days. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim interior, taking inventory with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen plenty of frontier poverty. A table with 2 chairs, handmade but showing skill. Shelves mostly empty, containing a few dishes, some jars, a tin cup. The fireplace cold ashes days old. And in the corner, a narrow bed where a woman lay motionless. But not helpless. Even in fever's grip, even unconscious, Martha Hale's hand was clenched around something. Caleb moved closer and saw the gleam of metal. A knife, still gripped tight in her hand. Defensive instinct so deep it persisted through delirium. This was not a woman who surrendered easily. Lily was already at her mother's side, small hands touching her face with desperate gentleness. "Mama, wake up. Please wake up. I found somebody to help, just like I promised." Caleb knelt beside the bed, pressed the back of his hand to Martha's forehead, and pulled back instinctively from the heat radiating off her skin. Dangerously high, the kind of fever that could cook a person's brain if it lasted too long. Her eyes opened slightly, unfocused and glassy. Her lips moved, forming words that made no sound at first, then barely audible. "Thomas, you came back." "That's Papa's name," Lily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She keeps thinking he's here. Keeps talking to him like he never died." Caleb stood, his mind racing through the limited frontier medicine he knew. High fever needed to be brought down. That meant water-cool compresses, possibly willow bark, if any could be found. But this had been going on for 3 days. Martha needed a doctor. Needed real help, not the fumbling attempts of a drifter who knew more about horses than healing. "Is there a town nearby, somewhere with a Dr. Willow Creek? Maybe 8 miles northeast. But Mama said we couldn't afford the doctor. He charges $20 just to come out here, and we don't have that kind of money." $20. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his pocket, where the leather pouch held every cent he owned. $43 earned from odd jobs across 3 territories. His entire worth reduced to crumpled bills and mixed coins. 8 miles to town. At least 4 hours round trip to bring back a doctor. Maybe more. He looked at Martha's flushed face, at the way her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements. Did she have 4 hours? Then his eyes caught something on the shelf above the table. A small ceramic jar, the kind used for saving coins. He crossed to it, lifted the lid, and felt his stomach clench at what he saw inside. $12 in small bills and coins. Carefully saved. Probably meant for spring seed, for supplies for survival beyond the next crisis. This was the moral calculus of the frontier distilled to its essence. Use Martha's money to save her life, but destroy any chance she had of planting crops come spring. Use his own money, trap himself here, until he could work off the debt and earn it back. Or use both, maximize the chance the doctor would come and commit himself completely to seeing this through. He looked at Lily, watching him with eyes that had already seen too many adults make excuses. Looked at Martha, fighting for breath. Thought about Sarah and the daughter he'd failed. Dead people don't need seed money, but if she lives, we'll find a way to earn it back. He grabbed the jar, added its contents to his pouch. $55 total. More than enough for the doctor and basic supplies. I'm riding to Willow Creek to bring back help. I need you to keep doing what you've been doing. Cool water on her face. Try to get her to drink when she wakes. Keep her covered, but not too warm. Can you do that? Lily nodded, her chin trembling, but her eyes determined. How long will you be gone? 4 hours if everything goes right. Maybe 5. But I'm coming back, Lily. That's a promise. And I keep my promises. He didn't mention that he'd just spent her mother's seed money. Didn't explain that he'd committed both of them to a debt they hadn't agreed to. Some things could wait until Martha was conscious enough to fight with him about it. Caleb mounted Ranger and turned the horse northeast toward Willow Creek. The sun was fully up now, warming his back as the buckskin settled into the ground, eating lope that could maintain for miles. The country rolled past, beautiful and indifferent, while his mind churned through possibilities, none of them good. The trail led through increasingly settled country. He passed a homestead where a man was already working his field, the rhythmic ring of an axe carrying across the morning air. Stopped at a creek to let Ranger drink and blow. Pushed on as the scattered buildings of Willow Creek began to take shape on the horizon. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 40 buildings clustered along a single main street with houses scattered beyond. A church steeple rose at the far end. Signs identified the usual frontier establishments: general store, hotel, saloon, blacksmith. And there on the south side of the street, a neat clapboard building with a shingle that read, Dr. Harrison Mitchell, physician and surgeon. Caleb pulled Ranger to a stop outside and dismounted. His legs protested the hard ride, but he ignored the stiffness and climbed the 3 steps to the doctor's door. Knocked hard, waited, knocked again, harder. The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a collarless shirt and suspenders. His expression suggested he'd been woken from sleep and wasn't pleased about it. Office hours start at 9, come back then. He started to close the door, but Caleb's boot wedged into the gap. I've got a woman dying 8 miles from here. She needs help now, not in 2 hours. The doctor's eyes narrowed with the calculation Caleb was beginning to recognize as the frontier's default response to suffering. I'm not a charity operation, friend. My services cost money. $20 for a house call, plus treatment fees. Can you pay? Caleb pulled out the pouch and emptied it into his palm. Every bill, every coin, everything he and Martha owned in the world. I've got $55. Whatever that doesn't cover, I'll work off. But this woman has been fevered for 3 days, and she's got a 7-year-old daughter caring for her alone. If we don't get to her soon, you won't need to worry about payment because there won't be anyone left to treat. Dr. Mitchell's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in his eyes. Not compassion exactly, more like professional interest overriding business sense. Where's this woman located? The Hale place. Hollow, about 2 miles west of the main trail, 8 miles southwest of here. Martha Hale, widow woman, lost her husband last winter. Recognition flickered across the doctor's face, and Caleb saw the calculation shift again. This wasn't just any patient. This was someone with history, someone who already owed money. I know who you're talking about. Made 2 house calls out there last year when her husband was dying. Haven't seen payment for either one yet. I'm sympathetic, friend, but sympathy doesn't pay my bills. She's dying, and her daughter is watching it happen. If that doesn't move you, then I'll find someone who it does move. There's no other doctor within 50 miles. The words came flat, stating fact without triumph. And I didn't say I wouldn't go. I said I needed to know about payment. Your 55 will cover the initial visit and basic treatment. If she needs medicine, surgery, extended care, that's extra. Fine. Caleb held out the money. Take it. All of it. Just move, doctor. Mitchell took the bills and coins with hands that showed a faint tremor, counted it twice before nodding. Give me 10 minutes to gather supplies. There's a trough around back if your horse needs water. The door closed and Caleb stood on the porch with empty pockets and a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. He'd just spent every cent he owned on a woman he'd met unconscious and a child he'd known for less than an hour. Committed himself to a situation with no clear exit and no guarantee of success. Made choices that directly contradicted 3 years of careful isolation. Sarah's ghost whispered in his ear, "About time you stopped running." He led Ranger to the trough and let the buckskin drink while the sun climbed higher and the town began waking around him. A woman sweeping her porch stopped to stare. Two men heading to the blacksmith's forge glanced his way and kept walking. Small town dynamics. Everyone noticed. Everyone judged. Nobody intervened. Dr. Mitchell emerged carrying a worn leather medical bag and a canvas sack that clinked with bottles. He'd added a coat despite the warming day. "I've got my own horse. Follow me. And I hope for your sake this woman's condition is as serious as you claim. You'll see soon enough." They rode in silence, the doctor mounted on a serviceable mare. As Willow Creek fell behind, Mitchell glanced over with the assessing look doctors develop alongside their medical skills. "You're not from around here. Number. Passing through. Family to Mrs. Hale. Never met her before this morning." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "That right? So what's your interest in all this?" "Her daughter found me on the trail and asked for help. I helped. Noble of you. Nothing noble about it. Just the only thing that made sense at the time." They rode another mile before Mitchell spoke again, his tone almost conversational. "You know, I've practiced medicine for 30 years. Started in Philadelphia, came west after the war thinking I'd make a difference out here on the frontier. And you know what I learned, that people are people no matter where you go. Some will bleed you dry, asking for help they don't need. Others will die before they'll ask for help they do need. Martha Hale is the second kind. That why nobody helped her yesterday when her daughter went asking. The Swensons are struggling themselves. Lost half their herd to disease last spring. The Coopers are both 70 years old and barely managing their own place. It's not that folks don't care. It's that everyone out here is one bad season away from disaster themselves. Helping your neighbor is noble until it means your own children go hungry. And which kind are you, doctor? The kind who helps or the kind who can't afford to?" Mitchell's jaw tightened. "I'm the kind who shows up, friend, even when I don't get paid, even when it means riding 8 miles before breakfast. So you can climb down off that moral high ground and recognize that maybe you're not the only person trying to do right in a situation with no good answers." The rebuke landed harder than Caleb wanted to admit. He'd been so quick to judge, so ready to see everyone else's failures, that he'd missed the simple truth. The doctor had come. Not happily, not quickly, but he'd come. "You're right. I apologize." They crested the ridge and the hollow came into view. In full daylight, the cabin looked even more desolate, a testament to stubborn survival against overwhelming odds. "How bad was she when you left bad?" "High fever, delirious, barely conscious. I spent what little time I had trying to cool her down with water. 3 days fevered, according to her daughter. Could be typhoid, could be pneumonia, could be a dozen other things. The fact she's lasted 3 days is actually promising. The ones that are going to die fast usually do it in the first 48 hours. They descended toward the cabin, and Caleb felt his chest tighten as they approached. This was the moment of truth. Either Martha would still be alive, and they'd have a chance, or Lily would be sitting beside her mother's body learning at 7 years old that sometimes even when you do everything right, you still lose. The door burst open before they could dismount. Lily came running out, her face transformed by a relief so profound it hurt to see. "You came back. You really came back. Told you I would. This is Dr. Mitchell. He's going to help your mama." Lily's eyes went wide, taking in the doctor's official medical bag, the bottles in his sack. For a moment, she just stood there. Then she did something that caught both men off guard. She burst into tears. Not desperate crying like before, but the kind of weeping that comes when someone who's been holding themselves together by sheer will finally feels safe enough to fall apart. Great heaving sobs shook her thin frame as 3 days of terror and loneliness and crushing responsibility finally broke through. Caleb knelt awkwardly beside her. "Hey now, it's all right, the doctor's here. Your mama's going to be fine." I thought Lily gasped between sobs. "I thought nobody was coming. I thought she was going to die and it would be just me, and I didn't know what to do. But we are here, and you did everything right. Everything. You kept her alive until help could come. That took more courage than most grown men have. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat. The girl can cry after I've examined her mother. Right now, I need to get inside and assess the situation. Miss Lily, can you compose yourself enough to answer some questions? Lily wiped her eyes with her sleeve and nodded, sniffing hard. Yes, sir. I can do that. Good girl. Lead the way. They entered the cabin and Mitchell went to work with practiced efficiency. Caleb stood near the fireplace feeling suddenly useless. This was the doctor's realm now. All he could do was wait and hope his midnight ride had been fast enough. Dr. Mitchell examined Martha thoroughly. Pulse temperature, chest sounds, eyes, tongue, hands. 5 minutes that felt like an hour. Finally, he straightened and turned to face them. It's pneumonia, both lungs involved, which explains the high fever and delirium. She's also severely dehydrated. Can you help her? I can try. But I need to be honest with you, child. Your mother is very sick. If this had gone on another day, maybe even another 12 hours, I don't think there would have been anything I could do. As it is, the next 24 hours will be critical. But she's going to live. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure she does. But I can't make you promises I might not be able to keep. What I can tell you is that she's got a fighting chance now. And she didn't have that yesterday. Do you understand? Lily nodded, though her face had gone pale. What do you need? Caleb asked. Hot water, clean cloths, and I need both of you out of the cabin for about an hour while I examine her properly and get her into clean clothes. They stepped outside into the morning sun. Caleb led Lily to a fallen log, and they sat the girl tucked against his side like she'd been doing it all her life. Is he really going to save her? He's going to try his best. That's all any of us can do. What if his best isn't enough? The question deserved honesty. Then we'll deal with that if it comes. But right now, your mama's got something she didn't have 12 hours ago. She's got a doctor who knows what he's doing. She's got medicine. She's got help. Those are good odds, Lily. Better than most people get out here. They sat watching the sun track across the sky. Eventually, Lily spoke again, her voice small. Mr. Reed, after Mama gets better, are you going to leave? The question struck at something Caleb had been avoiding since dawn. Of course he was going to leave. That's what he did. What he'd been doing for 3 years. Never intended to stop, never planned to put down roots. But sitting there with this child pressed against his side, looking at his empty pockets, thinking about the promise he'd made, Caleb realized leaving wasn't quite as simple as it used to be. I don't know. Haven't thought that far ahead. Mama's going to need help when she's better, and I'm too small to do much. And you said you'd work off what the doctor cost, so maybe you could stay. At least for a little while, just until Mama's strong again. We'll see. Let's get your mama well first, then worry about what comes after. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. And Lily seemed to understand the distinction because she nodded and leaned harder against him. They waited. The sun climbed higher. Inside the cabin came occasional sounds of movement, the clink of bottles, the doctor's voice speaking in low tones, though Martha couldn't possibly respond. Finally, the door opened. Dr. Mitchell emerged, rolling down his sleeves, looking tired but not defeated. You can come in now. I've done what I can for the immediate crisis. They followed him inside to find Martha still in bed, but now dressed in a clean nightgown, her hair brushed back from her face, her skin looking less alarmingly flushed. The cabin had been aired out, the sick smell replaced by sharp camphor and something medicinal. She's sleeping naturally now, which is what she needs most. I've administered willow bark for the fever and a tincture for her lungs. She needs water, constantly small sips every time she wakes. And she needs to be kept cool, but not cold. I can do that, Lily said immediately. The doctor pulled out a small dark bottle. This is laudanum for pain and to help her rest. 2 drops in water 3 times a day, no more. Too much will suppress her breathing. Can you measure 2 drops? Lily took the bottle carefully and counted out exactly 2 drops into the tin cup, her small face serious with concentration. Perfect. Now I'm leaving this along with the fever tincture and lung medicine. I've written instructions for each one. He handed her a folded paper covered in neat handwriting. Can you read? Yes, sir. Mama taught me. Excellent. Follow these instructions exactly. I'll come back tomorrow to check her progress. If she takes a turn for the worse, if she starts bleeding from the mouth or nose, if her breathing becomes labored to the point she can't speak, if the fever spikes again, despite the medicine you send for me immediately. Dr. Mitchell turned to Caleb. You'll be staying for now. Good. This girl shouldn't be alone out here. and Mrs. Hale is going to need round-the-clock care for at least the next few days. After the doctor left, a different kind of silence settled over the cabin, one shaped by cautious hope rather than desperate fear. Lily stationed herself beside her mother's bed with the medicine bottles lined up precisely. Caleb stood awkwardly in the center of the small space where he'd somehow transitioned from passing stranger to household fixture without quite meaning to. Then something caught his eye on the shelf where he'd found the jar of money, a piece of paper folded and tucked behind the dishes. He pulled it out and his stomach dropped as he read the careful handwriting. Land deed, Thomas and Martha Hale, 50 acres, purchased with loan from First Bank of Billings, amount borrowed $50, amount remaining $35, due March 1878. Below that in different handwriting, another note. Tools borrowed from J. Swenson, value $8, to be repaid in kind or cash. And below that in Martha's handwriting, shaky and faint. Seed money for spring, $12, must make it last. Caleb did the math with a sick feeling. $35 to the bank, $8 to Swenson. The $12 he'd just spent belonged to spring planting. Total debt, $55. Martha would wake up to discover the stranger who'd saved her life had also spent her future. The weight of what he'd done settled over him like a physical burden. He'd acted without thinking, made decisions that weren't his to make, committed them both to consequences he hadn't bothered to calculate. And now he was trapped. Not by the debt, though that was real enough, but by the simple fact that walking away would make him exactly the kind of man he'd spent 3 years running from becoming. The kind who made choices that hurt people and then disappeared before facing the consequences. Outside, the Montana sun continued its arc across an indifferent sky. Inside the cabin, Martha Hale slept and dreamed fevered dreams. Her daughter kept vigil with medicine bottles and damp cloths. And a stranger who'd stopped because a child asked him to discovered that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is stay and face what his choices have created, even when every instinct screams to run. Especially then. Dewey vào dàn ý chi tiết Việt phần 2 độ dài 4 tên từ bằng tiếng Anh, đảm bảo đầy đủ twist, đảm bảo được thông tin trong dàn ý. Chú ý không sử dụng bất kỳ dấu gạch nào trong bài. Track kết quả thường không phải TXT. Lưu ý cân đối nội dung để các kịch bản có tông độ dài từ 20.000 đến 22. Không to tone và style requirements, cinematic prose. Focus on visual storytelling and emotional intensity. Rhythmic pacing optimized for speech, text-to-speech. Limited dialogue, but each line must have emotional impact. Designed for high YouTube viewer retention. Target audience, male over Salmui, living in the U.S. emotionally engaged viewers. Do not make in the end of each part. Very, very important. Please remember, the first week passed in a blur of water and worry. Martha drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to recognize Lily, more often lost in fever dreams that pulled her back to conversations with ghosts. Caleb kept vigil alongside the child, learning the rhythm of crisis care. Cool cloths every hour. Medicine measured in careful drops. Sips of water coaxed between cracked lips. The small victories of keeping someone alive one moment at a time. He learned other things too. The weight of responsibility that came from making decisions for someone who couldn't speak for themselves. The particular exhaustion of watching another human being fight for breath and knowing your efforts might not be enough. The way time moved differently when measured in the spaces between heartbeats. On the fourth night, Martha's fever broke enough for real awareness. Her eyes opened clear for the first time since Caleb had arrived, tracking across the unfamiliar ceiling, the clean cabin, her daughter sleeping peacefully nearby. Finally settling on the stranger stirring the fire. You're real, her voice came barely above a whisper, rough from days of delirium. I thought maybe I dreamed you. Caleb set down the poker and crossed to her bedside, automatically checked her forehead with the back of his hand. The heat had diminished considerably, leaving her skin warm, but no longer dangerously hot. I'm real enough. Name's Caleb Reed. Your daughter found me on the trail 5 days ago. 5 days? Martha's brow furrowed, confusion and fear mixing in her expression. I don't remember. There are pieces missing. Fever dreams maybe, or just nothing. That's normal according to the doctor. You had pneumonia, bad case. He says you're going to pull through, but you need to rest and take your medicine and not try to do too much too fast. Martha's hand moved restlessly on the quilt. Caleb watched her take inventory of her situation with the kind of clear-eyed assessment that spoke to hard-won survival skills. A stranger in her home, medicine bottles she couldn't have afforded, her daughter apparently under this man's care, the arithmetic of debt and obligation practically visible in her expression. I can't pay you, the words came flat, stating fact. Can't pay the doctor either. I've got maybe $3 put by, and that's meant for winter supplies. Already settled with the doctor. And I don't want your $3. You don't understand. Martha tried to push herself up on her elbows, but the effort left her breathless and trembling. I don't take charity. I won't be beholden to strangers. Then don't think of it as charity. Think of it as neighbors helping neighbors. Think of it however you need to. But right now, what matters is that you get well enough to take care of your daughter because she's been through hell worrying about you. The mention of Lily made something in Martha's face crumble. Her eyes moved to where her daughter slept, exhaustion visible, even in rest. Dark circles, tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. She went for help. I remember that much. She kept saying she'd find someone, and I kept telling her not to, that nobody would come, that she should just stay with me so at least she wouldn't be alone when. She didn't finish the sentence but didn't need to. Caleb had seen enough death on the frontier to know the shape of those thoughts. The way people made peace with endings when they couldn't see any other way forward. Well, she did find someone, and somebody did come. So now you've got a different job, which is getting strong enough to prove that stubborn girl's faith was justified. Martha's lips twitched in something that might have been a smile if she'd had the strength for it. She gets the stubborn from her father. Thomas was the most hard-headed man in 3 territories. That's what Lily said. Also said her mother wasn't far behind. I suppose we deserved each other, but saying his name out loud cost her. Caleb saw it in the way her expression shifted, grief still raw despite 8 months of trying to heal. He poured water from the pitcher and helped her sit up enough to drink. Her hands shook with the effort of holding the cup even with his support. When she'd managed about half, he eased her back down. She lay there breathing hard, as if that simple act had exhausted her completely. Her eyes had already started to drift closed again. Mr. Reed, the words came slurred with approaching sleep. Thank you, for my daughter, for not riding past. Just Caleb. And you already thanked me once. Don't need to keep doing it. But Martha was already asleep, her breathing deep and even. The kind of natural rest that healed rather than the fever-driven unconsciousness that had gripped her before. Caleb stood watching her for a moment. This woman who'd survived a Montana winter alone with a child, who'd been prepared to face death rather than burden anyone with asking for help. He understood that mentality better than he wanted to admit. It was the same pride that had killed Sarah and their daughter. The same stubbornness that insisted bearing weight alone made you strong instead of just isolated. The debt papers on the shelf seemed to pulse with accusation in the firelight. $35 to the banker in Billings, $8 to John Swenson for borrowed tools, $12 for spring seed that no longer existed. All of it due or desperately needed, and none of it something Martha knew about yet. He'd taken her choices away by spending that $12. Made decisions about her future without her knowledge or consent. The fact that those decisions had saved her life didn't change the fundamental paternalism of the act. He'd done exactly what men and always did, assumed he knew better, acted first and justified later. The question gnawing at him was whether he'd done it to help her or to help himself, to save Martha or to save his own conscience from another death he could have prevented. Morning came cold and sharp. Lily woke with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to wake ready for crisis, her eyes immediately checking her mother. Finding Martha sleeping peacefully, some of the tension finally left the child's thin shoulders. She's better, Caleb said before Lily could ask. Woke up clear-headed a few hours ago, talked for a bit, drank some water. The fever's down considerably. The relief that washed over Lily's face was profound. She scrambled to her mother's bedside, taking Martha's hand gently. I knew she'd fight. I knew she wouldn't leave me. She's not out of the woods yet. Doctor's coming back today. He'll be able to tell us more. But yes, this is good. This is real good. They fell into the rhythm that would define the next several weeks. Caleb worked outside when weather permitted, tackling the endless list of repairs a homestead demanded. The lean-to's broken door, gaps in the cabin walls where wind had worked the chinking loose, chopping wood to replenish the depleted stack. Lily tended her mother with fierce dedication, and Martha slept woke, took her medicine, and ate small amounts of broth, and slowly came back to herself. Dr. Mitchell arrived at midday, riding up to find Caleb on the cabin roof replacing shingles that had blown loose during the previous winter. Playing handyman now, the doctor called up. Seemed like it needed doing. The patient's inside, awake and lucid as of last night. That's good news. Very good news, actually. Most pneumonia cases that present as severely as hers either die within the first 72 hours or turn the corner by the third day. If she's clear-headed, we're looking at the latter. Mitchell conducted his examination with professional thoroughness. Listened to Martha's lungs, checked her pulse, examined her eyes and tongue. Martha bore the attention with quiet dignity, though Caleb could see the effort it cost her. The pneumonia is resolving. Not quickly, mind you. You'll be weak for weeks, possibly months, Mrs. Hale. And you absolutely cannot overexert yourself or you risk relapse, which at this point could very well kill you. Do you understand? I understand. Though her tone suggested she understood but didn't necessarily intend to comply. But I've got a homestead to run, doctor. Chores don't wait for convenient recovery times. Then I suppose it's fortunate you've got help. Mitchell glanced meaningfully at Caleb. Unless Mr. Reed here is planning to abandon you immediately. 3 pairs of eyes turned to Caleb. He could feel the weight of expectation, the question hanging unasked in the air. This was the moment to clarify his intentions, to set boundaries, to make clear this was temporary assistance, not permanent commitment. I'll stay through winter. Make sure the cabin's sound. Get the heavy work done. After that, we'll see. Martha's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Reed, I told you I can't pay. And I told you I don't want your money. Caleb's voice came out sharper than intended frustration at his own capitulation bleeding through. Consider it working off the doctor's fee or whatever story lets you accept help. But the fact is you need assistance, and I'm here and I don't have anywhere more important to be. So that's how it is. Silence followed his words, heavy with things unsaid. Then Martha nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Through winter. And then we reassess. After the doctor left, Caleb went to check on Ranger in the lean-to. The buckskin nickered softly, nosing at his pockets for treats that weren't there. 3 years this horse had carried him across 6 territories, asking nothing more than water and grain and the occasional kind word. Patient companion to a man too broken to offer real friendship. Sorry, boy, I know you're used to covering miles, not standing still. Just a bit longer, but even as he said it, Caleb knew he was lying. Through winter meant at least 4 more months. Probably 5. That wasn't a bit longer. That was commitment, whether he admitted it or not. He was still brushing Ranger when hoofbeats announced a visitor. Caleb stepped out to see a man in his 40s dismounting from a sturdy workhorse. Tall, weathered with the kind of hardness that came from frontier survival. The man's eyes swept the cabin, the repaired leaned to Caleb himself, assessing everything with practiced efficiency. You'd be the stranger everyone's talking about. The voice carried no particular warmth or hostility. Just statement of fact. Caleb Reed, and you are John Swenson. I own the land 5 miles east of here. The man tied his horse and walked closer, movements deliberate. I hear you've been playing nursemaid to Martha Hale. Her daughter asked for help. I helped. Noble of you. Swenson's tone made it unclear whether he meant it as compliment or criticism. But there's the matter of $8 Martha owes me for tools her late husband borrowed. I've been patient given her situation. But I can't extend credit indefinitely. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. He reached into his pocket, then remembered it was empty. Every cent gone to the doctor. I don't have cash on me right now, but I can work it off. Whatever labor you need, I'll do it. Swenson studied him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. I don't want labor from you, and I don't want money from a stranger. The debt is Martha's. If she wants to settle it, she can settle it herself when she's well. The response caught Caleb off guard. He'd expected grasping creditor, not this careful distinction between who owed what to whom. Then why are you here to see if you're the kind of man who stays or the kind who runs when winter comes? Swenson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Last year, 3 different men stopped to help the widow Hale, brought her firewood, fixed her roof, promised to look after her and the girl. All 3 were gone before the first snow. They left hope behind, then shattered it. That's more cruel than not helping at all. I'm not those men. That remains to be seen. Doesn't it? Swenson moved back to his horse. I'll check back in a month. If you're still here, we'll talk about that debt. If you're gone, I'll know what kind of man you were. He rode off without waiting for a response, leaving Caleb standing in the yard with anger and understanding warring in his chest. Swenson wasn't being cruel. He was being protective of a neighbor who'd already been hurt by false promises, testing whether Caleb's commitment would outlast the first real challenge. The arithmetic of survival on the frontier wasn't just about money and labor. It was about trust, and trust had to be earned over time. Words meant nothing. Only staying mattered. That afternoon, Caleb rode to Willow Creek with a list of winter supplies Martha had reluctantly provided. The general store owner, a round-faced man named Peterson, totaled the goods with practiced efficiency. Comes to $18.40. Caleb's stomach sank. I don't have cash, but I can work it off. I'm good with my hands, can do most anything that needs doing. Peterson studied him with the same assessing look Caleb was starting to recognize as universal frontier courtesy. You're the fellow who brought Doc Mitchell out to the Hale place. That's right. Martha Hale's good people. Her husband was good people too, before that tree killed him. Peterson pulled out a ledger and made careful notations. I'll extend you credit. 20% interest payable by spring planting. Can you manage that? I'll manage. See that you do. Peterson started loading supplies into a crate. I've extended credit to 3 men who promised to look after Martha and Lily. Haven't seen payment from any of them. Makes a man cautious about trusting strangers. Caleb carried the supplies to Ranger, the weight of them, physical and metaphorical. $18.40 at 20% interest meant he owed $22.08 come spring. Add that to the $55 already spent on the doctor, the $8 to Swenson, and he was looking at $85 in debt before accounting for food and other necessities through winter. He'd trapped himself as surely as if he'd built his own cage. The ride back to the cabin gave him time to think about the choices he'd made, about the web of obligation he'd woven without fully understanding its complexity, about the fact that saving Martha's life had been the easy part and the real challenge was going to be keeping all 3 of them alive until spring. November brought the first serious snow. Caleb woke to find the world transformed, the hollow covered in white that made everything beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Martha was strong enough now to sit at the table for meals, though any extended activity left her breathless. Lily had relaxed considerably, the constant fear finally lifting now that her mother's recovery seemed assured. But Caleb felt tension building in his own chest. The cabin walls seemed to press closer with each passing day. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders. And worst of all, he could feel himself starting to care about these 2 people in a way that terrified him. Caring meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant the possibility of loss. And loss was the thing he'd spent 3 years running from. Thanksgiving week brought a blizzard that hit with sudden ferocity. Caleb had been out hunting hoping to bring down a deer to supplement their dwindling meat supply. He'd tracked one into the hills and was lining up his shot when the wind shifted and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. The snow came horizontally driven by winds that turned the world white. Caleb abandoned the hunt and tried to ride for the cabin, but visibility dropped to nothing within minutes. He dismounted, leading Ranger by feel more than sight, searching for any landmark he recognized. They found shelter in a rock overhang barely large enough for man and horse. Caleb unsaddled Ranger and huddled against the animal's warmth while the storm raged around them. Night fell, the temperature continued dropping, and Caleb found himself wondering if this was how it would end. Frozen to death in a Montana blizzard because he'd been stupid enough to hunt alone in uncertain weather. Sarah's voice came to him through the howling wind. Same pattern, same pride, same belief that you can handle everything yourself. He knew she was right. He'd learned nothing. 3 years of drifting, and he was still the same man who'd ridden away from his pregnant wife to prove he could provide. Still convinced that strength meant bearing weight alone instead of sharing it with others. If he died out here, Martha and Lily would wake to find themselves abandoned again. Another man who'd promised to help and then disappeared. Swenson would shake his head and say he'd called it. And Caleb's legacy would be one more betrayal in a world that seemed to specialize in them. The storm lasted 2 days. Caleb rationed his small pack of jerky shared water from his canteen with Ranger and waited for either rescue or death, with equal parts hope and resignation. On the second night, he thought he heard voices calling his name, dismissed it as fever dream or wishful thinking. But the voices persisted, and when he forced himself to venture from the overhang, he saw light flickering in the distance. A lantern held high, cutting through the last swirls of storm. Caleb. The voice was Martha's hoarse from shouting. "Where are you?" Here he waved his arms, stumbling toward the light. "I'm here." She appeared out of the darkness like a ghost wrapped in Thomas's old coat, her face pale but determined. Behind her came Lily, also bundled against the cold, carrying a second lantern. "What are you doing out here?" Caleb demanded, anger born of fear making his voice harsh. "You're supposed to be resting. You could relapse. You could die out here. So could you." Martha's eyes blazed with fury that matched his own. "Do you think I need another dead man on my conscience? Do you think I want to explain to Lily why the person who saved my life died frozen because he was too stubborn to wait out a storm I had to hunt? We need meat for winter. We need you alive more than we need venison." Her voice cracked on the words. "I already buried one man who thought he had to do everything himself, who wouldn't let me help with dangerous work because he wanted to protect me. Thomas died because I wasn't there to warn him about that tree. I won't watch another man kill himself trying to be a hero." The words hit like physical blows. Caleb stood there in the snow looking at this woman who should have been too weak to walk 100 yards, who'd risked her own life to search for him and understood what he'd done wrong. He'd repeated the pattern, taken all the risk onto himself, made decisions without consultation, acted like his choices only affected him when they affected all three of them. "I'm sorry." The words came rough, inadequate. "You're right, I should have waited. Should have told you where I was going. Should have done a lot of things differently." "Yes, you should have." Martha's anger had burned down to something sadder. "We're supposed to be in this together, Caleb. That means you don't get to make decisions that might leave us alone. Not anymore." They made their way back to the cabin through the dying storm, three people and a horse connected by lantern light, and the fragile understanding that survival required trusting each other even when trust felt dangerous. The cabin felt warm as summer after 2 days in the cold. Martha collapsed into bed, the exertion having cost her more than she'd admit. Lily hovered anxiously while Caleb checked her mother's temperature, relieved to find no fever returning. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep and Martha had recovered enough to sit up, they had the conversation neither wanted, but both needed. "I found the debt papers." Caleb said it without preamble. "On the shelf. Saw what you owed to the banker to Swenson. Understood where the $12 for seed money went." Martha's face went very still. "So you know." "I know. And I need you to understand I didn't spend it lightly. Your life was worth more than spring planting. But I should have told you. Should have let you make that choice. You're right, you should have." Martha's voice carried no anger now, just weary honesty. "I'm grateful you saved my life. But I'm angry that you did it by taking away my autonomy, by making decisions about my future without my knowledge. I was trying to help. I know. Just like Thomas was trying to help by cutting that tree alone instead of waiting for me to assist him. Just like you were trying to help by hunting in a storm instead of asking if the risk was worth it." Her eyes met his steadily. "I don't need a hero, Caleb. I need a partner, someone who trusts me enough to be honest about problems, to share decisions, to understand that my weakness doesn't make me incompetent." The words laid bare everything he'd been doing wrong, every paternalistic choice made in the name of protection, every decision that prioritized his need to be strong over their need to be equals. "Teach me." His voice came out hoarse. "Teach me how to be a partner instead of trying to carry everything alone. Because I don't know how. My father taught me that men provide and protect. My pride killed my wife. And if I don't learn a different way, I'm going to destroy this too." Martha was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held something like cautious hope. "We start by being honest. About money, about plans, about fears. No more secrets, even well-intentioned ones. We make decisions together, and if we disagree, we talk until we find a solution we can both live with. That's what partnership means." They spent the next hour going through everything. Caleb laid out the full debt picture. 55 to the doctor, 8 to Swenson, 22 to Peterson, another 15 for supplies he'd purchased without telling her, Total of $100 by spring, maybe more, depending on what winter demanded. Martha's face had gone pale, but she didn't flinch from the numbers. Just pulled out a scrap of paper and started calculating. I can weave blankets to sell. Lily can help with simpler work. You've been hunting. If we smoke and preserve the meat well, we might have surplus to trade in town. Between the three of us working, we might earn $40 by spring, which leaves us 60 short. Caleb stated it flatly. Not enough to pay the banker and keep seed money. We'll lose the land, not if we prioritize. Martha's pencil kept moving. The banker gets 35. That's not negotiable. We keep the land, we keep hope. Swenson, I'll talk to him. Explain the situation. He's a hard man, but a fair one. He might extend the timeline. Peterson's interest can be paid in labor through spring. That brings us to 70 total needed, 30 short instead of 60. Still short, still alive. Martha looked up from her calculations. We'll find a way. People out here always do. But we find it together, Caleb. No more secrets, no more hero acts. We're a team or we're nothing. He felt something shift in his chest. Some weight he'd been carrying alone finally shared across broader shoulders. It wasn't relief exactly, more like the first breath after years of holding tension. A team. He tested the word, finding it strange and right in equal measure. I can work with that. December brought Lily's 8th birthday. They had no money for presents, no traditional celebration. But Caleb had spent evenings carving a small, wooden horse working by firelight after the others slept. His hands weren't skilled at fine work. The proportions were wrong, the legs uneven, the mane, more suggestion than detail. When Lily unwrapped it on her birthday morning, her face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Caleb's heart sank. I know it's not much. I'm not good at carving. I just wanted to make you something. But Lily shook her head, clutching the horse to her chest. It's not that. It's perfect. It's just Papa used to carve me toys. And I miss him so much. Sometimes it hurts. And this made me remember. And it's sad and happy at the same time. And I don't know how to feel both things together. Martha pulled her daughter close, her own eyes bright with tears. That's called bittersweet, honey. When good things remind you of what you've lost, but you're still grateful for the good. Your papa would be glad someone's making you smile again, even if it makes you remember him too. Caleb watched them hold each other, two people learning to carry grief and hope simultaneously, and understood something profound. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant making space for new joy, while still honoring old loss. The wooden horse wasn't replacing Thomas's gifts. It was adding to them, building a new layer of care atop the foundation of what came before. The gift Mr. Reed gave you isn't really the horse, Martha said softly. It's the fact that he's here, that someone cared enough to stay and try even when the result isn't perfect. That's what matters. Lily nodded against her mother's shoulder, then looked up at Caleb with eyes that seemed older than 8 years. Thank you for staying, even when we're sad, even when things are hard. Thank you for not leaving like the others did. Her words wrapped around Caleb's heart and squeezed. This child had learned too young that adult promises meant nothing, that people left when things got difficult, that hope was dangerous because it led to disappointment. And here he was, day by day, proving that maybe not all promises were empty. Maybe some people stayed. Maybe commitment meant more than comfort. January brought Martha's relapse. Caleb woke to find her shivering violently despite 3 blankets, her skin burning with fever that shouldn't have returned. The terror in her eyes was worse than the physical symptoms. It came back. I'm going to die. Lily will be alone. Her panic fed his own, but he forced himself to project calm, to remember what Dr. Mitchell had taught him about pneumonia. Small relapses were common, dangerous but not necessarily fatal if caught early. You're not dying, I won't let you. He spent the night nursing her through the fever-cool cloths and careful doses of medicine, monitoring her breathing, ready to ride for the doctor if she worsened. Martha drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes lucid, often lost in fever dreams that mixed past and present. In one of her lucid moments, she grabbed his hand with surprising strength. Don't let her be alone. Promise me, Caleb. Whatever happens to me, don't let my daughter grow up without someone who cares. I promise. But you're not dying. You hear me, Martha? I'm not allowing it. You're too stubborn today, and I'm too stubborn to lose another person I care about. The words came out before he could stop them. Admission of feelings he'd been avoiding acknowledging. He cared about her, about Lily, about this makeshift family they'd cobbled together from desperation and need. Caring terrified him, but not as much as the alternative. Martha survived the night. By morning, her fever had broken again, leaving her weak but clear-headed. She looked up at Caleb with something new in her expression, something that looked like the beginning of trust. You stayed, even when I was difficult, even when it would have been easier to leave. Where else would I go? It was meant as a simple statement, but the truth of it resonated deeper than Caleb intended. He genuinely had nowhere else to be, no destination calling him, no purpose beyond this cabin and these people and the daily work of keeping them all alive and together. Somewhere in the past months, drifting had stopped being freedom and started being just running, and he was tired of running. February arrived with Valentine's evening and the confrontation Caleb had been dreading. Martha had grown strong enough to move around the cabin to help with cooking and light chores, strong enough to start going through the household accounts. She found the receipts. Every purchase, every debt incurred laid out in careful detail. When Caleb came in from chopping wood, she was sitting at the table with papers spread before her. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he could see anger simmering beneath the surface. You lied to me about the money, about the extended of the debts, about everything. I was trying to protect you from knowing the truth about my own situation. Her voice rose. From having a say in decisions that affect my future. Do you think I'm a child who needs protecting from reality? I think you were sick and needed to focus on healing, not worrying about money. And I think you made the same mistake my husband made, deciding what I could handle, making choices for me instead of with me. Her hands were shaking now. Thomas thought he was protecting me too, wouldn't let me help with dangerous work. And it got him killed because I wasn't there to warn him when that tree started falling wrong. Martha stood, papers clutched in her fist. I told you I needed a partner, not a hero. Either we're equals in this or you leave. Those are the only two options I can live with. The ultimatum hung between them. Caleb could feel the moment balanced on an edge. He could defend his choices, argue his intentions were good, retreat into the masculine certainty that he'd done what needed doing. Or he could choose differently. Choose vulnerability over control. Choose partnership over pride. You're right. The words came hard but honest. I was wrong. I made the same mistakes that cost me everything in Missouri. My wife Sarah died because I wouldn't listen to her, wouldn't share decisions, thought providing meant controlling. I lost her and our daughter because my pride was more important than our partnership. He sat down heavily at the table. I'm scared, Martha. Scared of caring about you and Lily. Scared of failing again. Scared that if I'm not strong enough to carry everything, I'm not worth keeping around. And I know that's backwards. I know partnership means sharing weight, not bearing it alone. But knowing and doing are different things. Martha's expression softened slightly. The anger still there, but joined by understanding. My Thomas was the same way. Thought his job was to shield me from everything hard. And I loved him for it, even while I hated feeling helpless. Her voice dropped. I don't want another man who dies trying to be invincible. I want someone brave enough to admit weakness. Then let me try. Let me learn how to do this right. They spent the evening going through every debt, every obligation, creating a shared understanding of exactly where they stood. $100 owed, maybe $40 they could earn through winter. $60 short with no clear path to making it up. The math was brutal, but doing it together made it somehow more bearable. As the fire burned low and Lily slept, they sat in companionable silence, not solving the problem but facing it together. And in that simple act of shared honesty, something shifted between them, something that felt like the foundation of something real. The knock on the door came as they were preparing for bed. Caleb answered to find John Swenson standing in the cold, a paper in his weathered hand. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Swenson's expression softened in a way Caleb hadn't seen before. I didn't come to collect the debt. I came to ask if you'd be interested in buying my milk cow. My wife died last month. I can't manage her alone anymore. The words hung in the cold air, and suddenly Caleb understood. Swenson wasn't their enemy. He was a mirror, another person struggling with loss, with survival, with the impossible weight of trying to carry everything alone. I'm sorry for your loss, Caleb said quietly. Swenson nodded once, grief passing across his face like a shadow. Martha knows what it's like. Figured she'd understand. And I figured maybe you folks could use the milk, seeing as you're trying to build something here. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was recognition. An acknowledgement that they were all just people trying to survive, trying to help when they could, trying to carry on despite loss and debt, and the endless challenges the frontier threw at them. Sometimes Caleb was learning the bravest thing you could do was admit you couldn't do it alone. And sometimes the strongest communities were built not from people who had all the answers, but from people willing to share their questions and their struggles and their small acts of imperfect kindness. March came to Montana with the kind of false promise spring always brought to the high plains. Days warm enough to melt snow into muddy streams. Nights cold enough to freeze it solid again. The earth itself seemed uncertain, caught between winter's death grip and the possibility of renewal. Caleb stood in what would become their expanded garden, turning soil that fought every thrust of the spade. His shoulders ached. His hands were blistered despite calluses built over years of hard work. But there was something satisfying about the labor, about preparing ground for seeds that might actually grow into something that mattered. Martha worked alongside him, moving slower than she probably wanted, her body still remembering what pneumonia had cost. But she was here alive, stubborn as ever, about pulling her weight. Lily darted between them, carrying water, pulling rocks, asking endless questions about what would grow where. They'd made it through winter. Barely. But surviving and thriving were different things, and spring planting would determine which side of that line they landed on. John Swenson had become an unexpected ally. The gruff widower stopped by twice a week, ostensibly to check on the cow he'd sold them, at a price so low it was practically charity. But really, he came to teach sharing knowledge Thomas Hale hadn't lived long enough to pass down. Crop rotation, soil preparation, the particular challenges of Montana growing seasons. This ground's been worked hard, Swenson observed, examining the dirt Caleb had just turned. Thomas pushed it too much last year, trying to make up for lost time after his injury. You'll need to let this section rest, plant nitrogen fixers here instead of wheat. What about over there? Martha pointed to the southern exposure. That'll do for wheat if you amend the soil first. Manure from the cow turned in deep. It's late for spring planting, but if you work fast, you might still catch enough growing season. They worked according to Swenson's directions, the four of them falling into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. And somewhere in the middle of explaining drainage and discussing yield estimates, Caleb looked up to find Martha watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep and the fire had burned down to embers, Martha broke the silence they'd been carrying for weeks. "We make a good team." Her voice was quiet but certain. Not just surviving anymore, building something. Caleb set down the harness he'd been mending, looked at this woman who'd somehow become the center of his world without him noticing the transition from obligation to choice. "Martha, I want to plant these seeds with you. Not just this season, every season after this." The words came out wrong, too practical, missing every romantic note he'd vaguely imagined. But Martha's lips curved into a smile that held more warmth than amusement. "Are you proposing to me in the middle of planting season covered in mud? I'm proposing to my partner." The setting doesn't matter. Her smile widened. "It matters a little, but I suppose it's fitting. We've never done anything the conventional way." She crossed to where he sat and took his hands, dirt and all. "Yes, I'll marry you, Caleb Reed. Not because I need someone to take care of me, but because I want to build a life with someone who understands that partnership means sharing both the work and the decisions. Someone who's learned that strength comes from vulnerability, not from pretending you don't need anyone." There was no ring, no grand gesture, just two people who'd found each other in crisis and chosen to stay through everything that followed. It felt right in a way that transcended every romantic notion Caleb had carried in his youth. "There's something you should know." Martha's expression grew serious. "This land is mine by law. When Thomas died, it passed to me. So technically, when we marry, you'll be joining my household, not the other way around." The reversal of traditional roles should have bothered him. 3 years ago, it would have. But Caleb found he didn't care about maintaining appearances or protecting masculine pride. "I'm fine being Mr. Martha Hale if that's what it takes. Though I was hoping we'd both just be the Reeds." "We can be the Reeds." Martha's eyes shone with something that looked like relief. I just needed to know you understood what you're getting into. An independent woman with debts and a daughter, and opinions about how things should be run. That's exactly what I'm getting into, and exactly what I want. They married in April on a day that started with rain and ended with unexpected sunshine. The ceremony took place in Willow Creek's small church, with Dr. Mitchell standing as witness and John Swenson serving as unlikely second attendant. A handful of neighbors showed up, the same ones who'd turned Lily away, now offering cautious goodwill. Martha wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself from fabric bought with egg money. Caleb wore his cleanest shirt and a borrowed tie that felt like it was strangling him. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate. But when they stood before the circuit preacher and spoke their vows, the weight of the moment felt real and binding as any ceremony in the grandest cathedral. I promise to stand beside you, Caleb said, when his turn came, the words emerging from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. In good times and hard times, in prosperity and want. I promise to listen when you need to be heard and to ask for help when I need it. I promise to honor your strength and to remember always that we're partners in this life. Not savior and saved, but two people building something together. Martha's vows echoed his commitment, promising partnership and honesty and the courage to keep choosing each other even when it was difficult. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared tasted like forgiveness and hope. In the beginning of a story neither had thought they'd get to write. The townspeople had organized a modest celebration at the hotel. Nothing grand, just cake and coffee and the awkward small talk of a community trying to make amends for past failures. The Swensons were there, looking somewhat ashamed as they congratulated the couple. The Coopers brought the wedding cake, apologizing for their earlier coldness. Even Peterson from the general store made an appearance, clearly pleased that his investment in extending credit was looking more secure with every passing day. You've given people a second chance, Dr. Mitchell observed, quietly watching the modest festivities. By succeeding where they expected you to fail, you made them examine their own choices. That's a powerful thing. I just did what needed doing. Exactly, that's what most people fail at. The obvious right thing, the necessary thing. They get caught up in complications and justifications. You and Martha chose differently. Before they left for the cabin, Lily pulled Caleb aside. Her face was serious with the weight of something she'd been carrying. I need to do something. Can you come with me? She led him to the small cemetery behind the church, to a simple marker that read, Thomas Hale, beloved husband and father. Lily knelt and placed a handful of wildflowers on the grave. Papa, I've found someone to take care of Mama. Someone good and strong who makes her smile again. I hope you're not angry with me for being happy he's here. Her voice cracked on the last words. Caleb knelt beside her, his own throat tight. Your papa wouldn't be angry, Lily. He'd be grateful someone's looking after his family. That's what good men want, for the people they love to be cared for even after they're gone. Martha had followed them. She knelt on Lily's other side. All three of them gathered around the grave of the man whose death had inadvertently brought them together. Thank you, Thomas. Martha's words were barely audible. For building something strong enough to survive you. For teaching our daughter to be brave. For loving us well enough that we know what real love looks like. They stayed there for a long moment, honoring the past before returning to claim their future. It felt important somehow, acknowledging that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. That new love didn't erase old love. That families could be built and rebuilt, and both versions mattered. May brought revelation wrapped in morning sickness. Martha had been tired, attributed it to the demanding work of spring planting. When the nausea started, she assumed she'd eaten something that disagreed with her. But when 3 weeks passed and her monthly courses didn't come, understanding dawned with the weight of both joy and terror. She told Caleb while they were working side by side in the garden, unable to wait for a more romantic moment. I'm pregnant. About 3 months along, if my calculations are right. Dr. Mitchell confirmed it last week when he was checking on the Swenson baby. Caleb's hands went still on the hoe he'd been using. The world seemed to stop, all sound and sensation narrowing to those words and what they meant. A baby, a child, another chance at the family he'd thought was lost forever. His throat closed up completely. Tears burned behind his eyes. Caleb. Martha's voice held worry now. Say something. Is this all right? I know we didn't plan for this so soon, but I thought. He pulled her close, holding her, like she was the most precious thing in existence, which she was. It's more than all right, it's everything. It's proof that second chances are real, that we really did build something worth having. But fear came with the joy, sharp and immediate. The memory of Sarah dying in childbirth, of the daughter who'd never drawn breath, of standing over two graves in the rain. I'm terrified. The admission came raw and honest, absolutely terrified of losing you, of failing again, of not being strong enough or fast enough or good enough to keep you safe. Martha pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm scared too. I lost a baby after Thomas died. Miscarried at 3 months because grief and stress were too much for my body to handle. I'm afraid of history repeating, afraid my body will fail again. Then we'll be afraid together. And we'll do everything differently than last time. I'll be here not miles away trying to prove something. We'll ask for help when we need it. We'll trust Dr. Mitchell and trust each other and refuse to let pride or fear make our decisions. They held each other in the garden while the spring sun warmed their backs and their child grew in darkness, unknown and already loved. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made work brutal and necessary in equal measure. The crops grew strong and healthy under Martha's careful tending and Caleb's muscle. Wheat stretched toward the sky, vegetables flourished in neat rows. The milk cow provided more dairy than they could use, allowing them to trade surplus in town for other necessities. By mid-July, they were looking at potentially their best harvest in years. Enough to clear most of their debts. Enough to plant again next year with money left over. Enough to build real security instead of just surviving crisis to crisis. Caleb allowed himself to hope, to imagine a future where they weren't constantly calculating how many dollars short they were, where his child would be born into stability instead of desperate poverty, where second chances actually meant something. The storm hit on July 23rd without warning. Caleb was in town picking up supplies when the sky turned green and the wind shifted. He'd seen hail before, but nothing like this. Ice the size of hen's eggs falling with enough force to shatter windows and strip bark from trees. He rode for the cabin through the assault ranger, stumbling and frightened, but game. Found Martha and Lily huddled in the lean-to, with the cow, all of them listening to the terrible percussion of ice destroying months of work. When it finally stopped, they emerged to survey the damage. The garden was devastated, vegetables beaten into the mud. The wheat field looked like a battlefield, 40% of the crop destroyed outright, another portion damaged badly enough it might not recover. Caleb walked through the ruined field with Martha, both of them too shocked for tears. All those months of work, all those hopes for clearing debt and building security, reduced to broken stalks and scattered grain in the space of 20 minutes. We can salvage some of it. Martha's voice held determination, fighting despair. The damaged wheat can be used for animal feed. We can trade it. The root vegetables that survived can be preserved. It's not a total loss. But Caleb had already done the math. They'd been counting on $55 from the crop. Now they'd be lucky to get $25, still $30 short on debts that were due in 3 months. With a baby coming, with winter approaching again, with no margin for error and no safety net. That night, after Lily had cried herself to sleep and Martha had finally stopped trying to recalculate their way out of disaster, Caleb made his decision. He found her sitting at the table, staring at numbers that wouldn't add up, no matter how many times she rearranged them. I'm selling Ranger. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Martha looked up sharply. No, absolutely not. That horse has carried you for years. He's family, which is exactly why this is the right choice. Families make sacrifices for each other. That's what love means. Caleb sat down across from her. Ranger's worth $35, maybe $40 to the right buyer. That clears our immediate debt and gives us a little cushion. We keep the land. We keep hope. We keep our family together. But you love that horse. I love you and Lily more. And I love the child we're going to have. Ranger's a good horse, but he's not irreplaceable. This family is. Martha's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back since the storm. It's not fair. You've given up so much already. Your money, your freedom, your whole life. And now this. Life's not about fair. It's about choosing what matters most and protecting it however you can. Ranger matters. but you matter more. The next morning, Caleb rode Ranger to Willow Creek one last time. He'd already arranged the sale with a rancher who needed a reliable cow horse, $35 paid in cash. The rancher was kind about it, sensing this was more than just a business transaction. Treated Ranger gently promised he'd have good care, a light workload, plenty of grazing. Caleb stood in the street after the sale was complete, $35 in his pocket in emptiness where his oldest companion used to be. He'd bought Ranger as a 2-year-old in Ohio, trained him himself, ridden him through 6 territories in 3 years of grief. The horse had been the one constant in a life defined by change and loss. And now he was gone, sacrificed for family, for partnership, for a future that might actually exist if Caleb could just keep making the right choices instead of the proud ones. He walked back to the cabin, 5 miles on foot carrying his supplies and $35, and the knowledge that love sometimes meant letting go of things you treasured to protect things you treasured more. Lily was waiting on the porch when he arrived. She'd been crying, her eyes red and swollen. "I know you had to sell Ranger. Mama told me why, but it's not fair." Ranger was family too. "You're right, it's not fair." And Ranger was family. Caleb sat down beside her on the steps. But sometimes family has to make sacrifices for each other. That's part of what it means to love people, to put their needs ahead of your own comfort. He pulled her close. "I'm going to miss that horse every single day. But I'd make the same choice 100 times over because keeping this family together matters more than anything else. And someday when you're grown, you'll understand that the hardest choices are often the most important ones." They sat together in silence while the sun tracked across the sky, and Caleb felt the weight of his decisions settle into his bones. Not regret exactly, more like grief for a necessary loss. The kind of sorrow that came from choosing between 2 good things and having to let one of them go. The debts got paid. 35 to the banker in Billings, securing their land for another year. 8 to Swenson, finally clearing that obligation. 22 to Peterson, bringing their account current. They had almost nothing left over, but they had their land, their home, each other. And Martha's pregnancy continued healthy despite the stress. Her belly swelled through summer into fall. Dr. Mitchell checked on her regularly, pronounced everything normal, reminded Caleb twice that hovering didn't actually help, and he should find productive ways to channel his anxiety. Caleb channeled it into preparation, built a proper cradle from scrap wood, stockpiled firewood until they had enough for 2 winters, hunted and preserved meat with single-minded intensity, did everything possible to create a buffer between his growing family and the chaos of frontier life. November arrived with the first serious cold, and on a night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Martha's labor began. Caleb had sent for Dr. Mitchell that afternoon when the contractions started. The doctor arrived at sunset, took one look at Martha, and settled in for what he predicted would be a long night. It was. Martha labored through darkness and into dawn, her strength tested in ways that made Caleb's physical work look trivial by comparison. He stayed close, holding her hand, offering water, feeling utterly useless in the face of what she was enduring. Lily sat outside the bedroom with Caleb during the worst parts, both of them trying not to show their fear, trying to believe that this time would be different, that Martha wouldn't die like Sarah had, that this child would live and cry and grow. The baby came with the sunrise, a boy healthy and squalling his lungs, announcing his arrival with impressive volume. Dr. Mitchell cleaned him efficiently, wrapped him in soft cloth, and handed him to Martha with a satisfied nod. A fine, strong boy, 10 fingers, 10 toes, good color. He'll do just fine. Caleb stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to believe it was real, afraid to step forward and discover this was another dream that would dissolve into loss. "Come meet your son." Martha's voice was exhausted but radiant. "Come meet Thomas." She'd chosen the name without consulting him. Named their child after her first husband without apology or explanation. And Caleb found he didn't mind at all. It felt right somehow, honoring the man whose death had created the space for this new life, acknowledging that families built on ruins of other families weren't betrayals but continuations. He crossed to the bed and looked down at his son, at this tiny human who represented every hope he'd buried in Missouri and never expected to unearth. The grief he'd carried for 3 years broke open, and tears streamed down his face unchecked. Not tears of sadness, tears of release, of relief so profound it hurt. of gratitude that second chances were real, and that sometimes broken men got the opportunity to build again. I won't fail you. The promise came whispered, but absolute. I won't fail any of you. Martha took his hand, their son cradled between them. We won't fail each other. That's the difference this time. We're not alone in this. Spring came to Montana in 1879 with the same dramatic transition as always. Snow melting into torrents, mud everywhere, the earth awakening to possibility. Caleb stood in the garden teaching Lily how to work the plow. The ox they'd traded for the previous fall pulled steadily while Lily gripped the handles with fierce concentration, her small frame barely managing the implement. But she was learning, growing stronger, becoming capable. Martha sat on the porch with baby Thomas in her arms watching them work. The baby was 4 months old now, healthy and growing, already showing signs of the stubborn temperament that ran through both sides of his family. John Swenson rode up just as they were finishing the first row. He dismounted stiffly, age and recent grief having taken their toll on him through the winter. Caleb, I need to borrow your plow next week. Got my own fields to turn. Use it as long as you need. No charge. Neighbors help each other. Swenson nodded slowly, something like approval in his weathered face. You stayed, he said it simply, statement of fact and acknowledgement both. Through winter, through hardship, through everything, you actually stayed. This is home. Where else would I go? The old rancher studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Thomas Hale would have liked you, would have respected a man who keeps his word and loves his family and understands that strength comes from staying, not running. They shook hands and Caleb felt something shift. Final acceptance from a community that had watched him prove himself through actions instead of words. He wasn't the stranger anymore. He was one of them. After Swenson left, Caleb walked to where Martha sat with their son. Lily had abandoned the plow to come coo over her baby brother. The scene was so domestic, so ordinary, so different from the isolation he'd carried for 3 years, that it still caught him by surprise sometimes. What are you thinking about? Martha asked, reading something in his expression. About the day I heard Lily crying, about how close I came to riding past, about how different everything would be if I'd made that choice. Do you regret stopping? Not for a second, but I regret that it took me 3 years to be brave enough to try again. 3 years of running when I could have been building something that mattered. Martha shifted Thomas to her other arm. You weren't ready 3 years ago. You had to heal first. Had to learn that strength doesn't mean carrying everything alone. Sometimes the longest way around is the only path that gets you where you need to go. Lily looked up from making faces at her brother. Papa, are you glad you stayed? The title still made Caleb's throat tight. Lily had started calling him that 2 months after the wedding, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. He'd never asked her to, never expected it, but hearing it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. I'm glad I stopped running long enough to find you. All of you. I'm glad I learned that family isn't something you lose once and never get back. It's something you can build and rebuild, and every version matters. He looked at Martha, at Lily, at baby Thomas sleeping peacefully despite the commotion around him. The best things in life require the biggest risks, require being vulnerable enough to care even when caring might lead to loss. I spent 3 years trying to avoid pain by avoiding connection. All I did was make myself lonely. That evening, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, Caleb and Martha stood outside watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The land around them was quiet, the cabin behind them solid and warm. Tell me something, Martha said after a while. That day on the trail when you heard Lily crying, what made you stop? What was different about that moment? Caleb thought back to that afternoon that felt simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Remembered the weariness, the instinct to keep moving, the voice in his head telling him involvement meant complication. I think I was just tired enough of running that when an opportunity to stop presented itself, I took it. Not because I was particularly brave or virtuous, but because some part of me recognized that a life spent avoiding pain is also a life spent avoiding everything else that makes living worthwhile. He paused, searching for the right words. Lily asked for help, and for once I didn't calculate the cost before deciding. I just helped, and that one moment of not overthinking changed everything. I'm glad you stopped overthinking. Me too. Best decision I never quite made consciously. They stood together in comfortable silence. Behind them, the cabin glowed with lamplight. Inside, two children slept safe and warm. Around them, the Montana frontier stretched endlessly, beautiful and harsh and full of possibility. Caleb thought about the graves in Missouri, about Sarah and the daughter he'd never met, about the 3 years he'd spent punishing himself for failures he couldn't undo. And he realized something profound. They wouldn't want him to keep suffering. Sarah would want him to love again, to build again, to find joy in the life that continued after hers had ended. The best way to honor what they'd shared wasn't to remain broken. It was to heal and grow and use the lessons learned through pain to build something better. Martha, I need to say something. He turned to face her directly. I love Sarah. Part of me always will. But loving her doesn't make me love you less. You're not a replacement or a consolation prize. You're the person who taught me that hearts can hold multiple truths, that honoring the past and embracing the future aren't contradictions. I know, Martha's voice was gentle. Just like Thomas will always be part of me. Our first loves don't disappear. They become foundation stones for everything we build after. They walked back inside together, checked on Lily, sleeping peacefully, stood over Thomas's cradle watching their son dream infant dreams. And Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not the absence of struggle, because frontier life guaranteed plenty of that, but the deep satisfaction of knowing he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what mattered most, surrounded by people who knew his flaws and chose him anyway. Later that night, lying in bed beside Martha, Caleb spoke into the darkness. People are going to ask about my life someday, about how I ended up in Montana, how I found this family. What should I tell them? Tell them the truth. That a crying child asked for help and you were smart enough to stop. That a stubborn woman was too proud to accept charity, but brave enough to accept partnership. That building something from almost nothing requires courage and commitment and the willingness to risk your heart even when you have every reason to protect it. Martha rolled to face him, but mostly tell them about learning that the strongest thing a person can do isn't needing nothing from anyone. It's letting people in despite the fear, building connections despite the risk, choosing hope despite having every reason to choose isolation instead. Her words settled over him like a benediction, and Caleb understood that this was the real legacy he'd leave. Not the land he'd helped preserve, or the debts he'd paid, or even the children he was raising. The legacy was the lesson itself. That broken things could be mended if you were willing to do the work. That second chances were real for people brave enough to try again. That family wasn't just blood, but choice renewed daily through small acts of commitment and care. Outside the cabin, 4 wooden markers stood in a small cleared space. Thomas Hale, Sarah Reed, and 2 smaller ones for the babies who'd never drawn breath. Caleb had brought Sarah's remains from Missouri the previous fall, given her a resting place here in this hollow that had become home. The graves weren't forgotten or neglected. Fresh wildflowers appeared regularly, placed by Martha or Lily or Caleb himself. They were tended with love, honored with memory, incorporated into the ongoing story of this patchwork family. Because the past didn't disappear just because new things grew. It became foundation, context, the rich soil from which new life emerged. The road ahead still stretched, uncertain. More challenges would come, more hardships the frontier would throw at them that they couldn't predict or prevent. But they'd face that road together. This family built from desperate need and stubborn hope and the simple courage of one man who'd heard a child crying and decided that someone else's crisis was exactly the opportunity he'd needed to stop running from his own. And in choosing to stop, in choosing to help, in choosing to stay, Caleb Reed had found what he'd been searching for without knowing it during 3 years of restless wandering. A place to belong, a family to love, a reason to believe that broken things could be mended if you were willing to accept help along the way. The Montana winds still howled through the hollow on winter nights. The summers still brought their share of heat and hardship. But inside the cabin that Thomas Hale had built and Caleb Reed had helped sustain, there was warmth and laughter, and the kind of love that made every challenge worthwhile. They'd taken separate broken pieces and built something whole. Proved that sometimes the best families aren't born, but chosen. And in doing so demonstrated that the measure of a man's life isn't found in avoiding failure, but in having the courage to try again after failing. to love again after loss, to build again after everything falls apart. That was the legacy. That was the story worth telling. And as Caleb drifted towards sleep, Martha's hand in his children safe in the next room, he understood with complete certainty that every mile he'd ridden, every mistake he'd made, every painful lesson learned through loss had been necessary steps on the path that led him here. To this moment, this family, this second chance at the life he'd thought was lost forever. The price of staying had been everything he'd carefully protected during 3 years of drifting. His isolation, his self-sufficiency, his carefully maintained distance from anything that mattered enough to hurt. But what he'd gained in return made that price seem trivial. Connection instead of loneliness. Partnership instead of pride. Hope instead of regret. A future built on the hard-won wisdom that strength comes not from bearing weight alone, but from sharing it with people brave enough to stand beside you. People ask me if I regret stopping that day, Caleb thought, as sleep claimed him. I tell them I regret wasting 3 years before I was brave enough to try. I learned that the strongest thing a person can do is dare to build something with others, knowing it might fall apart. That legacy isn't measured in land or money, but in lessons passed down. That loving is always worth the risk. And in the morning, he would wake to baby Thomas crying for feeding, to Lily asking to help with chores, to Martha planning their day with the practical efficiency of someone who'd survived too much to take anything for granted. He would wake to ordinary miracles, to second chances made real through daily choice, to a family that proved redemption wasn't a single moment, but 1,000 small decisions to stay and try and love despite fear. The sun would rise over the Montana plains like it always did, indifferent, eternal, beautiful in ways that hurt to notice. But this time Caleb would notice, would see the beauty and accept it as gift instead of punishment, would understand that being alive meant feeling everything, joy and pain intertwined, and that the only real failure was choosing numbness over both. This was home. This was family. This was the life he'd found by stopping long enough to hear a child crying and choosing to help instead of riding past. And it was enough. More than enough. Everything.